Hello everybody, it's Michael from Replica Airguns with another tutorial video. Today we're going to talk about a very common question I get. How many shots can I get from a CO2 cartridge? I'm sure I get asked this like every day. People want to know exactly how many shots they can expect from any given gun or a specific gun they're looking at. I generally don't answer that question because there's just so many factors involved. So this is a scripted video. I've got it all written down. It's going to be a little robotic when I talk here, but I wanted to make sure I addressed every point. And also, you're going to be able to go to my website if you want to and read the full written version of this over there. So if you want to read it, I'll have a post over in my article. Look for the link in the description. There'll also be some pictures there that you can look at, some illustrations as well. So let's get into the written version of this tutorial. Now the reason I cannot give a simple answer is because there are many factors involved that determine how many shots you can expect to get, not only from different guns but also on different days in different shooting situations. I can tell you that one 12-gram CO2 cartridge can deliver as few as even only 30 shots to as many as up to 100 shots from an air gun. Now let's talk about why there is such a variation in how many shots you can expect from a 12-gram CO2 canister or even other sizes as well. Now here are some factors that will determine how much CO2 is used up while shooting a CO2 air gun, and that would go for BB, pellet, or airsoft guns that use CO2. Even paintball, I would imagine too. Paintball guns, there are some out there that use CO2 as well. Usually they're going to use bigger canisters, but they are affected by the same variables. Alright, temperature. Temperature can greatly affect how many shots you will get from a CO2 canister. The reason for this is because the CO2 requires heat to expand. If more heat is available, then less CO2 is required from the CO2 canister with each shot. In very cold temperature, especially when the gun and the CO2 canister are both very cold, a CO2 gun may not even function as the canister and the gun can freeze up. Because of this temperature effect, you will not only get more power in warm temperatures, but also more shots from a CO2 cartridge. And likewise, in cold temperatures, you will get less powerful shots and less of them per CO2 tank. Alright, CO2 canister size. So the size of the cartridge, you'll notice we have a 12 gram here, we have I believe an 88 gram here, and this is a, what is this, a 20 ounce. So we've got different variations or different sizes here, and that will affect how many shots, not just because of their size, but a lot of times because how these tanks cool down over time. Since CO2 cools as it is used up, the CO2 tank will also become cold as you shoot, and as discussed already, a cold CO2 tank is less effective. Smaller CO2 tanks, like this guy, will cool down much faster than larger CO2 tanks. So when shooting rapid fire with a 12-gram CO2 cartridge, you may only expect to get about 20 to 30 good shots before taking a break and letting your gun and the CO2 tank warm up again. Now some CO2 air guns that use these 88 or 90-gram CO2 tanks, they will allow for a lot more rapid fire shots before having to allow for warm-up time. Even a dual 12-gram CO2 air gun will operate better when shooting rapid fire than a single 12-gram CO2 air gun, since it has double the CO2 capacity. So we're talking about this type of magazine here that is from the Steel Force, I believe, Steel Storm, Steel Force, and it has two 12-gram CO2 cartridges, which allow for a lot more rapid fire shooting before it cools down. So you can effectively get double the amount of rapid fire shots with the same amount of cooldown as you would with a single cartridge, okay? So that's important to know. Now one other illustration which I don't have here on my table, if you're dealing with propane tanks, propane is a very similar gas to CO2. It kind of functions the same way. Propane or green gas is used in a lot of airsoft guns. And if you're using one of these green tanks, say if you're using it on a propane heater, you're not going to get a lot of time with it. What will happen is the propane heater uses a lot of the propane rather quickly, and when it gets down to about halfway, you usually get this frost line on the tank. And because the tank is so cold, even though it's half full, it just doesn't allow for the expansion of the gas so well, so the heater won't be as effective. If you switch over to one of those big propane tanks that you use on your barbecue, you can get so much more heat, not just because of the size, but it doesn't really cool down the same way. It doesn't cool down as quick. The tank won't get that frost line so quickly. If you let this tank warm up a bit, you're going to be able to use it again in that propane burner, but you have to let it warm up. That's the same thing that happens with CO2 air guns. Alright, let's get into the CO2 valve settings. On pretty much all CO2 air guns there is a valve setup that when the hammer is dropped, the valve is open for a very short period of time, allowing the CO2 to escape from the CO2 cartridge and enter the breech and barrel area of the gun, propelling the BB, pellet, or your airsoft round. Now, how long this valve is open for determines how much power the gun will have and also how much CO2 is used up for each shot. Now, more CO2 released by the valve equals more power and less shots per CO2 cartridge. Less CO2 released by the valve equals less power and more shots per CO2 cartridge. Another indication of how much CO2 is being released is how loud the gun is. Now, just to quickly show you the valve here on a magazine, this is a CO2 magazine from basically a 1911, KWC 1911, and here's the valve right here. I can't really push it in because it's actually got some CO2 in it, but when this valve is pushed in, the CO2 goes through a chamber and gets released out here. It goes into basically the gas blowback tube, and you're in business. So that's the valve we're talking about. On this particular magazine, the valve is built in, but on some airsoft guns or some BB guns or pellet guns, the valve is built into the gun itself. Now, blowback operation, yet another hot topic. Now, some people either love it and some people hate it. Blowback operation simulates the slide action found in semi-auto pistols and provides some recoil and also allows for the hammer to be cocked between shots, which allows for true single action operation, just like a real semi-auto pistol. So what's not to love about blowback operation? Well, blowback operation steals a little bit of CO2 every shot to make the slide operate back and forth. This robbing of the CO2 will get less shots from a blowback gun than if it were not a blowback gun. Now, because of this robbing of the CO2, blowback guns are often less powerful since the CO2 being released from the valve has to propel the ammunition and work the slide blowback operation. So let's take a quick look at this 1911 blowback gun, and what I'm talking about is, so we're gonna pretend that well, we can probably do it. I think I have some gas here. So I'll have to rack the slide once to manually get that hammer to come back and to basically chamber around, because when the slide comes forward, it actually picks up a BB and puts it into the chamber or the breech. So now that that's happening, I can shoot this gun, right, and watch the hammer come back every time, right? So if I drop that hammer, I wouldn't be able to shoot because this is a single action gun. It needs to be all the way back, right? And it'll lock back when you're out of BBs. I just basically drop the slide release. Okay, same goes for most blowback guns. Now this is a non-blowback gun, and so I can either shoot in single action mode by cocking the hammer manually. This one also has CO2 in it, but there's no rounds in it. And I can also shoot in double action, right, or single action. But you'll notice I have to manually work that hammer with my finger, either my thumb or my trigger finger. Right? So I'm doing the work of cocking the hammer in this gun, not basically the slide coming back using some CO2. Alright, semi and full auto. When shooting a CO2 airgun, you may be tempted to shoot fast and furiously. I know it's fun, but as I mentioned earlier, shooting quickly will cool the airgun and the CO2 canister down, leading to poor performance if you do not allow the airgun to warm up between shots. And for this reason, full auto airguns tend to be very ineffective when it comes to CO2 efficiency, especially when using a single, smaller 12-gram CO2 canister. For instance, I'm going to show you a gun here. This KWC Mini Uzi uses a single CO2, okay, in this magazine. It can shoot in semi or full auto, which is really cool, but it only has one CO2 canister, right? We talked about having multiple ones could be better. Now when shooting in semi-auto, so every time you pull the trigger, you can expect to get about 2 25-round magazines of shots as long as you allow the gun to warm up between magazine reloads. Now when shooting in full auto with the same KWC Mini Uzi, that's just you pull the trigger and it just basically unloads the magazine pretty quick, actually, with a lot of recoil. You're going to get a good magazine worth of shots, but there will be a very noticeable cool down at the end of the shooting, at the end of the magazine. And then after that, you're going to pretty much have to switch to semi-auto to get perhaps only another half a magazine worth of shots to finish off the CO2 cartridge. Now, still worth the fun shooting in full auto in my books, but it will eat up a lot of CO2. Now, shooting pace. Even when shooting in semi-auto mode, you can shoot quickly or take your time and be more precise. The more time you take in between shots, the more shots you will get from your CO2 tank or canister, and the more power each shot will have. So if you want to get the most out of your CO2 cartridge, the most shots that is, and the most power, then avoid the temptation to blast everything in sight as quickly as possible. Or, like me, you can give into it and simply stock up on CO2. Still a lot cheaper than shooting real live ammunition from a real steel gun. A couple things I just wanted to show you real quick. Now, I gave you that example of a gun that only really shoots 30 rounds per CO2. Here's an example of that gun. This is the Desert Eagle by Umarex. It's a pellet blowback gun. It releases a lot of CO2 per shot. It's very powerful. I'm not going to say it's as loud as a 22, but it's getting out there in volume. It's just really loud. It's super accurate. It's basically putting lead 7 to 8 grain pellets at 450 FPS downrange with blowback operation. That's why you're only going to get about 30 to 35 shots with this gun. Still totally fun to shoot. I don't mind it at all. Here's an example of a non-blowback gun. Now this one, it depends on which one you have, but it can be very efficient if you have the less powerful version. If I can get this to focus. There we go. Sig Sauer SB2022. This comes in a KWC non-branded or non-licensed version as well. And there are a couple different versions of this gun out there. There's the lower power version and the higher power version. This is the higher power version. It's loud. It shoots pretty close to 500 FPS. It's not going to get as many shots, but the lower power version is going to actually get quite a few shots, well over 100 shots. Now there are some blowback air guns that get about 100 shots. This, what is this one again? The HPP. This gun, it gets pretty close to 400 FPS shooting steel BBs. So let me focus in on here again. So you'll get about 400 FPS using standard 5.1 grain steel BBs. And you know what? It gets pretty close to 100 shots. You do have to take your time in between mag loads, but it's very efficient for a blowback gun. It's got a pretty heavy slide. It's a lot of fun. So if you're looking for a gun that actually is pretty efficient and has blowback, this would be a good option. One last thing I wanted to talk about is, if you are concerned about CO2 and optimizing your performance and your power and, your usage, your efficiency, you can use these adapters from ANT that will connect, say, a tank like this using the proper line system into these. This is basically a pass-through CO2 cartridge, so there's no CO2, it's just basically a pass-through, and the CO2 from the larger tank goes into your gun. You can check out my videos on that, and then you can pretty much just keep shooting as much as you want until this tank empties, and that will take a long time. You can get these tanks refilled for pretty cheap. You can have multiple tanks on, sitting around waiting to go. Probably the most efficient way to go, and you're going to maintain your power as well. So great for like full auto guns. Alright, hopefully this video has been informative and hopefully it answers those questions, and I won't get those questions as often. You know what, I'm still going to get those questions because not everybody watches my videos, or all of them, but at least I can point you to this video now, put a link in there, and you can watch this video and get all the facts. Alright, thanks for watching another Replica Airguns video. Don't forget to subscribe. Check me out on Facebook and Twitter. Username is Replica Airguns. Also come on down to replicaAirguns.com where we have articles, post reviews. Again, I'll have a written version of this. I'll put a link in the description. You can click on that and read through this whole tutorial online over at replicaAirguns.com. We also have our Canada and US online Replica Airgun stores where we sell air guns, BB guns, pellet guns, blank guns, airsoft guns, knives, and other accessories. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.